name is Kenneth Wright. I'm 88 years old now. I was born on the 5th of May, 1930. And what happened really was this. Those early years, as I can remember, were very, very happy, even though I was later aware of what troubles were going on in the 1930s. But of course that doesn't come until a bit later on in my life. I think possibly the first thing that I can say I remember is my grandmother on my father's side had an off licence in Altrincham, and it was down Oakfield Street actually, where Oakfield Street joined then Oakfield Road, and it was right on the corner there. And an off licence, it was actually owned by a firm called IT&J Gasgarth. Now the reason I've given you that name is because it does have an effect on our family eventually. My granny, as I can remember, this I'd probably only be 3 or 4 year old then, she was a very, very adept lady at dealing with people, because that was really one of the roughest parts of Altrincham. And, you know, one of the things I did remember, and it was quite amazing actually, was a lady used to come in with a jug, a metal jug. It was probably a pint at least, anyway. And she used to ask for a pennyworth of slops. Well, I'm not kidding you, in those days then, the off-licence, they would have a hand pump for the bitter and another hand pump for mild. And of course the slop tray was beneath. And the beer at that particular time was Iron Coops. And Iron Coops ales, actually, the bitter and the mild were both pale, practically looked the same. So the slop tray was full of all the little dregs from that. And my granny used to pour that in, fill her jug for a penny. And it struck me really, because a penny then for me was, you know, was your spends sometimes, because you could buy things at a farthing in those days. It was quite amazing. But anyway, one thing I do remember about that period was those people in Oakfield Street. I used to watch them play there was a yard at the back, and they always enjoyed themselves, and they played football, the boys, and I used to stand on a little part of the wall at the back, and this particular time I was climbing up, and I pulled off the three-cornered stone at the top, and it landed on my leg. Well, that, of course, I was in a bit of a state at the time, and I was only probably 3 or 4. And I had to go to Manchester Royal with that. And then the journey was on the electric train. And I'll never forget how frightened I was at the one particular spot. That was at Knockmill Station, where there was a lot of viaduct that was quite high then. Looking out through the window, it looked as though the train was going to fall down. Yes. And it used to frighten me a little bit, that. And that was the earliest remembrances I have of that short sort of period. Then when I got to, when I was about 4.5, I was one of those younger boys that got called up because of the year in which I was born, the month in which I was born. So I was younger than the rest of the class. But that, of course, wasn't a very nice experience for me, because the funny thing was I didn't read a lot as a child, but I was always drawing and sketching, and I spent more time doing that than I did learning how to read properly. And the school teacher then picked me up one time and said, Kenneth Wright, read out what you had. And then the strange thing was then that we did have, I can remember this very vividly, a card, and on the card were 2 Chinese children, Kishna and Sheena, the names were. And I picked up the card like this, and I was just so nervous. Like, oh, and I couldn't speak. And this teacher said to me, "Kenneth Wright, you terrible boy," you know. Well, I just wished then that the ground would open up and swallow me away. But that experience, it was awful. And it stuck with me an awful long time, did that, about this business of not being able to stand up and talk. And it made me very nervous of the situations like that. Anyway, that was the early recollections. Then when I went into the juniors, probably 1936 or 7 was it? These are the years I'm not quite sure about, but I remember singing one song, and it's only just come to me through me having to rake up things from the past, and it was this. I hope you're not going to be offended by it, but it said, "Who's that coming down the street? Mrs. Simpson, sweaty feet. She's been married twice before, and now she's knocking at Edwin's door." Well, that was the king, who I'm not sure whether that was 37, perhaps it was, yes. That he took the throne, but he was never crowned. Of course,
that was 1936. Yes,
36 was it? Yeah, he abdicated because of Mrs. Simpson. But that was quite strange because. That I don't know how I remember, but I think probably I remembered because I was always interested in music, and any tune or song would stay with me quite a bit. And then as we went into then the senior part of school, I got very interested in woodwork and practical work, you know, because that's the sort of thing that appealed to me rather than the academic sort of approach to life. Anyway, that went through fine. And then, of course, in 1938, things weren't looking so good. And, you know, this business of, in Germany, I was very much aware of the fact that the German youth there, what it seemed to be was that Germany was developing a type of youth, a very disciplined type of youth. And in a way it was admired to a degree. And then of course we had various ways of, there was all sorts of things that went on then. They had the black shirts, you know, and all that sort of thing. And this great nationalism was developing. And then of course we were all worried about war. It was looming. And I never forget my granny on that occasion saying, lad," she was proper Cheshire person, lad, "I hope you don't have to go in the army eventually." Because she'd had one son that was killed in the 14-18 war. It was my mother's brother. Well, she had 3 brothers actually in the war. And another one, he had a piece of shrapnel went right through his leg. He survived that, but died many years later. I did meet him through thrombosis, and that was that. My own father, he was too young really to be in the First World War. But when this war came up then, or was looming, again, it was very much like, it reminded my grandmother of what was happening before, because you see, her 3 sons that were called up were all in the Cheshire Yeomanry. So they were preparing for war then, in a way, a disciplined form of approach. Whereas we didn't see much of that, because we all thought the last war, the Great War, was the war to end all wars, and we wouldn't have that sort of thing again. But here it was looming. And then the next thing I remember was Neville Chamberlain coming back from meeting Adolf Hitler and saying, "I have a document here that proves we'll have peace in our time." And we thank goodness for that. And then, of course, it backfired. and Germany, was it Poland they attacked, didn't they?
That's right, yes.
We'd got an agreement with Poland, hadn't we, to defend, and the war started. Well, I didn't really feel frightened, but I was shocked. The family were more frightened. They thought it was terrible, you know, and I can remember that. Anyway, as the war progressed, and in those early parts, it didn't seem as though it was going to affect us too much. Now, the funny thing was, just before the war, my mother's sister had bought a bungalow in Gronant on North Wales coast. Mm-hmm. And we used to go there for holidays. And then, of course, during the war, we did get there once or twice. We had a friend that had a car and used to take us. And I remember at that particular time that whenever that journey was awful to North Wales, I used to feel car sick. And of course I was about 9-year-old then. And that's where we went. And during the war, of course, then it developed. And we had, then of course, all the windows were covered at home with tape and that to stop the glass shattering if there was bomb raids. And the earliest recollection of bombs then, what happened was, oh yeah, it was by the time I got to 11, which was 1941, then I was very, very interested in football. I'd been more interested in football than anything else, I think. So I was playing for the school team when I went eventually from the senior school at Stamford Park to Bradbury Central School, which was right across the way. And there, funny enough, we used to sit two at a desk, and the chap that sat at the desk with me, he liked football as well, and we both played together. We were both in the House of York, and we both played together. And in actual fact, we played all those years together until everybody getting called up at the age of 18, which broke up all that sort of thing. But then, of course, what was happening locally was the bombing of Liverpool had started, and a lot of the kids were evacuated from, we had lads in our road from Birkenhead, mm-hmm. and we didn't take anybody in from Birkenhead, but prior to that as well, there'd been the bombing of Manchester, and there we took in a boy from, what was it, Greystone Road in Stretford, yeah. And I never forget, he had to live with us, but he was crying upset all the time. He didn't like it, this business of, you know, being away from his mum. So they went back eventually. So, but the evacuees, that was a period, it was again, you all come down our drive, and they'd had tags on them, and then would we take them in? It was strange for that, strange for us, and strange for those children, honestly.
Yes.
But next door, but one to us, there was a Methodist minister and his wife, and they had one daughter. And the Methodist ministers, they only did so many years. I think it was 7 years in one spot, and they had to move on. And he'd been in Guernsey for 7 years, and he'd got to know some of the families there. And there were 2 boys in a family that he knew, they called the Lemprieres. And he tried to trace them to look after him. Well, both of them wanted to, but one of the boys then that had been evacuated, one of the brothers, the younger one, was up in Scotland, way up somewhere, with a family that had taken him in more or less like their own son. It was quite good, that was. And the other one, Norman Lempriere, he was at a place in Glasgow. Well, it was like a borstal in a way, because they found out more or less that he was very unhappy there, and they were, up in the morning, 6:30, scrubbing the steps and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, they applied for adopting him for the time, and they did. They took him in. Well, he was next door but one to me. He was 1 year older than me, and I never forget, the minister came round to our house and said, they've got this boy, evacuee, would I take him to school with me? So I said, yeah, it's because he'd got a place at the Bradbury Central School. And like I say, I was just mad on football, and when he came to the door, we all wore shorts then at the age of 11,
Yes, quite.
So he was in corduroy trousers. I'll never forget that, because I thought anybody that wore corduroy trousers was a Jesse. And so I said to him, do you like football? Oh yeah, he said, yeah, I do. I said, do you play football? He said, yes. So I said, well, what I do on the way to school, I said, I take a tennis ball and just keep kicking it in front of me. I said, well, in those times, there were no cars on the road.
No.
It was, you could go from Edgerton Drive down to our school and not see a car. So he went one side of the road and I was the other, and I'd tap the tennis ball across to him, and then he'd tap it back to me, and we went all the way to school like that. And then I thought, I wonder if he does play. And one time, I never forget, he stepped over the ball and then back-heeled it to me, and I thought, oh, he's good. Well, the funny thing was that I liked playing outside right then, which was Stanley Matthews was my idol. And he played inside right. And we both played again on the school team. So the chap that sat next to me, my friend, there was then Norman Lempriere from Guernsey. He played inside right. Noel was captain. Inside right was Norman, and I played outside right. And we went right through those years together. Played in the Service of Youth League, and that was the happy times that we had, even though the war was on. But what happened was most of the playing fields had been dug over because there was this Dig for Victory week and all that sort of thing going on. And I never forget, again, art was one of my favourite subjects, and they asked me if I could do posters for Salute the Soldier Week was one, to raise money for the army and NAFI and places like that. And I did. They had it displayed, that one, Salute the Soldier Week. Then there was Dig for Victory Week and all this sort of thing going on. And most of the playing fields were being dug over and had food planted on them. So our football pitches were not very good.
No.
And they used to get very, very cut up. Anyway, that was beside the point. So what went on after that was then we saw things like the American army coming over when America joined the war, and all the big houses in Hale, they were taken on by the Americans then, and they came round again to our houses and asked us if we'd take one of the soldiers in and let him use our bathroom, because the bathing facilities were not good. So we did, and I'll never forget this chap that we had. Called himself Buck something. Anyway, he'd fought Lou Armbers, he was a boxer. My father, who had then worked at IT&J Gascars, and that again is, you can see how my father had got work there through his mother working for them. Mm-hmm. And he'd been there all his working life at IT&J Gascars. And he was able to get beer And this American soldier, the first time I'd ever seen this was, my father gave him a bottle of beer, and he asked for the salt, and he put salt in his beer to take all the fizz out of it, and that was quite funny. I'd never seen that before. But I believe those American soldiers, we used to watch them training, and funny enough, when they were marching and they'd got these soft shoes on, and they looked as though it was a form of a dance rather than an army march.
Yes.
Anyway, we watched them on the donkey field where we played football, and how they were training and what have you. And thought, in my mind, I thought they were sloppy soldiers, But anyway, they weren't. And all those that were evacuated round here, that were billeted round here, were killed, I believe, at the Normandy landings, because the beach that they landed at was terrible to get through. Anyway, that was that. So we did have the Americans like that, but the other thing about the Americans then, was when I was in my teens, was probably 13, I don't know. A few years get mixed up a bit.
Yes.
They were courting all our young ladies, and they were offering them nylon stockings and cigarettes and things like that attracted them all. And we got a bit jealous of that sort of thing, because we were then taking an interest in young ladies. And then as it came to 1944, I was then 14-year-old. Well, my father had never been a very fit chap, and he'd gone into the Home Guard. And what happened on one weekend where they were camping out somewhere, he came back home, and he was in a terrible state. He was bronchial, and he'd got a cold on top of that, and he was in a bad way. So he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "There's nothing wrong with you, young man, it's only a cold, it'll wear off," and he carried on. And of course, what had happened anyway, his chest must have been in an awful state. He developed TB, and then of course he died, and he was ill for quite some time. And then at his death, this was the point again about this IT&J gasket where he worked. The chap that owned it was George Podmore, who's a lovely man, and he was not married, and he had no children, but he was a proper gentleman. He paid my father's wages for 12 months to help my mother out, because she'd got like 3 sons. I was the middle one. And so my father, while he was ill, he was thinking about me having to start work, because my eldest brother had started, and he was in the building trade. He was a bricklayer, but there was no bricklaying going on at the time, as you know, and all these sort of restrictions on building materials made it damn near impossible to do anything apart from repairs.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, I think some of the time, the firm he was working for, they had to dig graves, to keep occupied and what have you. And like I say, all the young men had gone, and I was the only thing, as I say, there was any good at really was art, and nobody wanted anything to do with art in 1944. So I started work at Liner Titan Machinery as a junior draftsman. Well, when I started there, it was quite amazing, because, you see, some of them were kept out of the army because they were on important work.
Yes.
But the majority of young fellas had been called up, and in the drawing office there was nothing but old men, and the chap that was alongside me, he gave me and got a huge drawing board and just put 3 lines across, sharpen your pencil in such a way, and do lettering. And there was a good start to make me neat and tidy. And in the end, I did 1 or 2 tracers drawings and things like that. But anyway, I couldn't stick it there, because also all the firms where the young men had gone into the army, and we were thinking about it, when the war finished, that they would have to have the jobs back.
Yes.
So it looked as though you were in a sort of temporary state. So I left, and I went into the building trade. Now then, I was a decorator. So the wages were a bit better than in the drawing office, not much. But anyway, it was to help out, because my mum, was in a bad way, really. We got through those years okay. And then, of course, as I went through my teens, and that's a different kettle of fish, the war had come to an end. But there we are.
I mean, do you remember VE Day?
Yes, I certainly do. On VE Day, I was 15, and like I say, my best friend Norman Lemprey, I was next door but one, but he living with a family that were a religious family. He had to be in bed for 9:30, and so that particular night he said, "Well, what we'll do, Ken, I'll go to bed, and then I'll climb out through the bathroom window, and we'll go to one of the celebrations," because the celebrations that were going on, it was fantastic, And so he did. But as he climbed out through the bedroom window, through the bathroom window, onto a little, it was the roof really of the kitchen, he stepped into a puddle of water, and his socks were wet through.
Oh dear.
But it didn't bother him, because
Yeah.
we went down and we had a great time, with celebrating with everybody. It was just wonderful, it was. Well, the strange thing was then, at that time, by the way, that my elder brother, who was 3 years older than me, I was 15, he was 18, due for call-up. And, he never got called up, and the funny thing was then, my father was probably one of the only people who voted Labour in our area, and our newspaper was the Daily Herald then. Mm-hmm. And he told, oh no, he didn't. But Alan, my brother, phoned up the newspaper and said, "What shall I do? I've not had me calling up papers." He said, "Probably it's been thrown up in the air at the end of the war with so many celebrations that went on."
Yes.
And so he avoided the army. So he was very lucky in that respect. But he got married. He got married quite young, and it left me as the major wage earner. So I became a man very quickly, and I stayed out of the army until I was 21, because I wanted to serve my time and also provide more money for my mother. What happened then, you see, was this, that at 21, that was in 1951, I was 21, I got my calling up papers, and the chaps that had just come out of the army then, that were working alongside me, because they're mostly trainees, because they called them trainees because when they'd been called up during the war, they'd not served the time at all. And this was the period they had to make up. So there was, but they were self-employed, some of the chaps. And there was this particular firm I was working with were men like that, the trainees. And I, of course, I'd learnt my trade properly. I was doing grading, marbling, sign writing, and all those sort of things. And they valued my work a lot. So they said, when you get called up, Ken, you'll go to Great Ducie Street in Manchester, and they'll ask you what you want to go in. And he said, but they should be in the army because there's no room in the Air Force, most people would say, or the Navy. But tell them what regiment you'd like to go in, a corps rather than the infantry, because the infantry, all you learn is how to fire a rifle and throw a grenade and all that sort of stuff. Whereas in the corps, you can continue with your trade. So I said, okay. So I said that. They put me in the infantry, of course. And then the Cheshire Regiment, the Worcestershire Regiment, the North Staffs and the South Staffs were all in a brigade called Mercia Brigade. And they were each in different parts of the world. The Worcesters were in the worst spot. They were in Malaya, and the war was still going on in Malaya because, you know, they'd fought the Japs for 6 years, and they weren't going to hand the rubber plantations back to the British. They said they might as well have let the Japanese win. Anyway, I had opinions about it, but I didn't. You don't have opinions when you're in the army, but I didn't feel as though it was valid, that war, you know, because I thought they were fighting for freedom, the bandits, as they called it. Well then, and I guess say I had embarkation leave. I'd done all the jungle warfare training in North Wales, and what happened was I was waiting for this, you know, instruction then to leave and go in we're in what they call the spiders' huts around the parade ground. Anyway, in comes an orderly sergeant, and he says, "So, Private Wright." So I stand up, "Sir." He says, "Have you read company orders today?" I said, "No, sir." "Every bloody soldier reads company orders, that's your duty." So he said, "You're on commanding officers parade at 11 o'clock. Well, to go before the commanding officer, you've got to have all your tunic pressed and all your gaiters and that, blancoed, and all your brasses cleaned." Anyway, the lads in the barrack room helped me, and I thought I'd been put on charge for something I'd done perhaps while I was on leave, you know. Anyway, what it was, I would go marching before the commanding officer, left, right, left, right, left, right. But by then, I was a sort of well-trained soldier, and I was 2250217, not Private Wright anymore. So the commanding officer said, "Fall out to regimental sergeant major." And he said to me, "Stand easy," and then I've stood easy, and then stand at ease, you know. So, no, stand at ease, then stand easy. It's the opposite way around. He said, "There's a corporal here from the regimental band of the Worcestershire Regiment, wants to have a word with you." So I thought, well, so he said, "Take him in that back room, corporal." So I went in this room, and of course, he said, "Sit down there." Well, I sat down like a ramrod, you know, with straight back, and I'd been trained that way. He says, "Relax, soldier. Have a cigarette." Well, I couldn't believe it then, you know, as he said. So he said, "Look, I've just come back from Malaya. We've been there for 4 years." He said, "And the band should be 40 strong." He said, "But it'll be down to 18 by the time we get back. So they've sent me back on a recruiting campaign." He said, "I see that you play the clarinet and saxophone." So I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Well, if I gave you a pass to go home, would you bring your clarinet and do an audition in the morning?" "Will you do anything to get home?"
Yes, quite.
Again. So I said, "Certainly." Came back home and met everybody again, and then went back next morning. He stuck a piece of music up in front of me. It was quite simple, really. And he said, "Can you play that?" So I played it. "Can you play such and such a scale?" and one or two things. And then I did all this, and he said, "You'll do." I said, "What do you mean I'll do?" I said, "I'm off to Malaya." This is on the Thursday then, and I'm sailing Saturday to Malaya. And they did put me in a potential leaders platoon, which meant that I was going to have to take the responsibility of a lance corporal. Anyway, he said, "You don't have to." So I said, "I don't have to? Why? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, look," he said, "you can sign on now for the regular army." So I said, "Oh, I don't want to sign on." So he said, "Well, look, what's happened is this. The minimum time you can sign on in the army is 12 years, you see. And it used to be 9 years with the colours and 3 years on the reserve. But with the war having been on and recruits down in number, they reversed it and made it that you could do 3 years with the colours and 9 on the reserve." So I said, "Oh," and my wage would go up, and then I was only on £1.10 a week, to go up to £2.10 a week. So I'd have been able to send more money home to my mother. So I went back in the barrack room, and the chaps in there, they're saying, what are you doing? What are you going to do, Ken?" Well, they've all had training, jungle training, and they said I'd definitely go in the band. So I decided, yes, I would. And so then, of course, all the lads went off, and I then waited for the military band to come back. But that 3 years, then 3 years as a regular soldier made a big difference to everything, really. So it helped me out, even though I wasn't doing my trade. And I think that's about it. And after that, of course, when I came out of the army, I went to IT&J Gaskets and asked them if I could, as a decorator, could I take on their work, and they gave me their work. And I was very interested in mural painting, you see, and I'd doing coloured drawings of what I was going to do and all that sort of thing. And it was very, very good. So I've always been in admiration for that firm that my father worked for.
Yes.
And it's no longer existing now. It was all sold up, but it was very, very good.
Mm. Mm. Fascinating story. I mean, you mentioned to me before we started the interview there was an incident where you'd about having to do some sign writing.
Yeah.
And I think you were told by whoever it was that you weren't to do it, but
Oh yes, this was a regimental sergeant.
Yes.
What happened was I painted all the bandstands for the military band that was in, and the regimental star. It is it's the Star and Garter, really, with the motto of it has a recordant lion on with the words "firm" underneath, and Honi Soiki Malipont, the Royal Seal, around the outside. And it was quite an interesting thing to paint, really. And the regimental sergeant major, who was the same rank as the bandmaster, which is WO1, is in the infantry. The bandmaster is not an officer; he's a warrant officer, first class. Anyway, he was chatting, must have been, with the bandmaster, the regimental sergeant major, one of the mess dudes, and he said, "I want that chap that's in your band to paint a regimental star for me over my office door." So the bandmaster, who's showing his authority, again, because you can't have him. He's a member of my band, and he'll be rehearsing. So he said, oh, can't I? So as I say, the next day that I was in the band stores, so I was in a really looking after all the instruments, and it meant I was on my own in this, and I was free from the usual barrack room. But I had to put cardboard over the bottom part of the windows to just protect it from people looking in, mainly because of the instruments. And also it kept me a bit more private for me. So it meant at Rivali sometimes if it was a bit late, it didn't matter. This particular time, there's a little corner just bent back of the cardboard, and a knock on the window, and it was, I said, oh, I didn't know what he was saying. Anyway, I went, because it was locked, I had to lock the place up, unlocked the door, and he said, you're on charge in bed after Rivali. I thought, oh, blimey, he'd looked in through that corner. And what happened then, of course, I get put on 3 days jank, as we call it, 3 days confined to barracks, which means that you've no private time. You do your normal duties, but you have to do other things in the evening. So, and in the early morning as well. So I'm stood outside the guard room, and they had all the others on jankers with me, and they all get sent down, cookhouse duties, this, that, and that. And the RSM's on this lineup, and he's the one that he gives everybody a job except me, you see. And then he comes to me when they've all gone, and he said, now I've really got you. He said, you'll do this sign for me. And that's what I had to do. But the funny thing was, like I say, I did enjoy the band, and it was good. I played at the Royal Albert Hall one time with them. It was a Burma Star reunion. But I've still got all the magazines I used to illustrate then, the Regimental magazine, because I was very interested in art.
Yes.
So it was good practice, even though to be alongside regular soldiers, they're quite tough, some of those guys. You see, they recruit them in the military bands from Borstal sometimes. Young lads that they get, and they're tough guys, some of them. So, my word, it certainly brought me on as a musician.
Did you continue to play after you left the army?
Yes, but not for very long, because what happened was, like I say, I'd started my own business, and that took up a lot of my time. And I've still got the clarinet down below, and I've just got rid of the saxophone, but now my teeth have had it, you know, and you can't blow anymore, so it's a thing of the past, but a very enjoyable part.
Yes, yes. Going back to the war itself, did you witness anything like bombing or anything like that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you see the all talk, skipping over it all, aren't they? Yeah, I never forget this night that we didn't have a shelter, an air raid shelter in our garden, but we used to go under an oak table when there was a bomb raid on. And this particular night, as I say, I was in Edgerton Drive, and that's not far from Hale Road. Hale Road runs right the way through from Hale, up through Hale Barns and up towards Ringway Airport. We used to go up to Ringway Airport, by the way, then it was Ringway Airport, cycle on our bikes, and we'd collect shrapnel from the ACAC, you know, firing. But the ACAC would never be in one place. That used to go all around the country lanes, firing, you know, at German aircraft.
Yes.
We could remember German aircraft because, you know, then we were very good at plane spotting, and the sound of a German aircraft is quite different than ours. You know, we could tell whether the Germans were coming over or not. But this one particular night, a bomb was dropped in Hale Barns, and on what is now the college up there. Anyway, college, it hit in the college grounds. The next bomb on the same night was dropped, and it landed in Hale Cemetery, of all things. Well, Hale Cemetery was only just up the road from where we were, so
Yes.
the house shook.
Yes.
And then the next bomb was dropped, and it landed in Byram Street, Altrincham. Well, Byram Street was where, you know, I said about that pal of mine when I went to Bradbury Central School that played football with us. He lived in Byram Street, and he didn't come to school that day. So we were worried to death we were about that. And we all went up, and of course it had dropped across the road from him. But you see, that was one night. There was another night where a landmine was dropped in Charter Road, which is near Stamford Park. And that was an awful night. But in the Manchester blitzes, good heavens, it went on for who don't know how many days. But I never forget one morning going out into the garden, and we saw all bits of paper were dropping, burning paper, and there was a glow over Trafford Park. You know, there was a big bomb in Trafford Park they had. That was awful. Then another thing, you know, when I say about that bungalow in North Wales, we were there one weekend. Just on the weekend we had to go because you had to shift all the shifting sand that used to blow up around the bungalow and dig it all out every so often.
Yes.
So even that had to go on during the war years. But they'd been bombing Liverpool, and from there you can see, you know, the glow of all the burning buildings over in Liverpool, and that was awful. But again, there, you see, on the sandhills, what we were doing, this is the Air Force, we're training, and they used to put targets on the sandhills there, and then they'd dive down shooting at the targets. And of course, Warren was closed off during that time, but after it had all finished, we used to go down, collect all the empty shell cases and the clips, and make bandoliers with cartridge cases. Yeah, and collecting shrapnel was quite something, you know, and also fins off incendiary bombs. We collected those. Yeah, these were all things of the past.
Did you keep any of those?
No, not now, but I did for a while, you know. So, you see, over those years, they went by, and you forget an awful lot, don't you, then? It just goes into the back of the mind.
Yes. And we've covered things pretty well, I would think, from what you've told me. I mean, you haven't told me much. I mean, you at some stage you will have met your first wife.
Ah, that was much later on. That'd be 1953. I was in the army in the Worcestershire Regiment, and I'd taken her out at a dance, and you know, that's how we used to meet all the young ladies then, through dancing. And I was very interested in music, you see. And prior to that, I must just tell you about some of the music things. I remember, you know, on the Saturday morning, what we used to do, put the radio on. I'll never forget this. And there was a program that came on, music. It says, "This is Sergeant Johnny Brown and the Band of Renown." And then they start off with Moonlight Serenade.
Yes.
Glenn Miller.
Yes.
The American Forces Network music. Well, I used to love the sound of Glenn Miller, and that was that. But going back to my wife, and that just reminded me with the business of the music. And I took her home one time, and then she introduced me to her parents, and she was only young. She was 19, I think. And they weren't having a very happy time in the family. And she's, you know, after we'd been going out in a while, I said, you know, it was good, you know, we were in love. And she wanted to leave Worcester, so I said, well, I don't want to get married while I'm in the army, really, but she wanted, so I did. So I got married in the army, and of course then what I had to do was apply for permission to marry.
Yes.
So the commanding officer, and I married in Worcester, and the marriage went on for many years, but it went to, in the end. I had three children by her.
Yes.
And then things went wrong, and she left me in the end. But left me with 2 children. So I've got a daughter aged 6 then to look after, and another son aged 14. The oldest one had got married. But that's all the past.
Yes, of course, yes, yes.
Yeah. But it's all like part of, you see, the experiences we have in life. People say that they're awful experiences and all the rest of it, but it's all a learning curve. And even now, I'm 88, I'm still learning. I've got to keep the mind open like that, because you see, the only thing about this now, we've been talking about now, what you used to call it in the army was swinging the lamp, you know, going back in time. And some people live in that past.
Yes.
And all they can do is talk about it. Well, I'm not for that, me. I believe, you know, life's got to be enjoyed to the full. And if I can keep reasonably active, I'm not as active as I should be, but I'm still interested in arts and music. And I take place in, no longer in the music, but I do go to concerts and listen and enjoy them. And that was another thing about being in the military band, by the way, that when I took over the job of the band stores, the chap that was leaving the army, he'd done his time, said to me, he said, "You seem to be always wanting to play jazz." And that. I said, "Yeah, well, it's interesting." Well, just let's go in the band practice room and listen to a bit of Mozart. Well, I'm not kidding you, he gave me some music, again, serenades from Mozart, and I've still got the book now, you know, and playing those serenades was absolutely out of this world. And you see, I then became a great Mozart fan.
Yes.
And I still regard that as being the finest music you'd listen to.
I mean, you certainly sort of
Pardon?
more. You're certainly artistic in many ways, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you have examples of some of the? You said that you had books with some of the things that you had drawn in the past.
Well, when I was in the army, then the bandmaster, through seeing me do all the band stands and that, he said, "I write band notes for the regimental magazine,
Yes.
which is called The Greening." So he said, "Would you illustrate them?" So I said, "Okay," and I did it for the 3 years I was in. So I've got those books. What happened was this: I'd forgotten all about that, and my daughter visited Worcester one time, and she went to now there's no longer a Worcestershire regiment; it's gone. She went to the regimental museum there and asked if they'd got greenings from this period, and she got them and gave them to me on my 70th birthday, I think it was, or 80th, 70th, yeah. And I was most surprised. I said, "Good heavens, I wouldn't have thought I'd have ever seen those again." But so I've kept them because it just reminds me of those periods again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I suspect we're coming towards the end.
Yes.
But I just thinking, I mean, about your time in the war and possibly in the army as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people have experienced some sort of legacy, if you like, as a result of
Yes.
those experiences.
Yes.
Is there anything that you can think of that might have affected the way you lived after?
Oh, definitely, yeah. You see, as a young man going into the army at 21, I was like older than the others. They were nearly all 18. Now, I had got more of a matured attitude, which was very helpful. But when I went into a military band, of course, I was the new recruit and they were all old soldiers. Now, to go into the discipline that there was then was quite something.
Yes.
And I'll never forget that, because you know, this sort of thing now that youth gets, this very strong feeling that they more or less know everything. When you're 21, you know everything. And well, you become, what I used to say was this, that when I was at school, when I became 14 leaving school, you cock of the school, and you've got the big head, and then you start the job, and you're not back down again, and
Yes.
you're sweeping up and brewing up. And then you gelled up. By the time you're 21, oh, you've been through all that. And then, of course, you get called up and go in the army, and you go knocked down again to the bottom of the pile. And then you get through that, and then you get married, and you get knocked down again. But, you know, life is full of, it's not being knocked down in a way, but it's all periods that, if only we can control this ego that governs our lives, if you're not careful, we're not living a proper life, because they're all things of the past. I'm not any of those things. They've just, I've experienced them, they've gone. And I'm in a stage now where when they call it old age, but it's only the body that's getting old, not the mind. And we keep the mind as active as I can, and as free as this identity to any particular part, you know.
Yes.
I'm not, I painted all these around here, all the way upstairs, and so people say, oh, you're an artist. I said, I'm not an artist. I said, I enjoy artwork when I'm doing artwork. But if I'm an artist all the time, what a boring son I'd be. Because, sorry about swearing. What it is really is this, that people, if they're looking for identification, and they're looking in the work that they've experienced during the past, something's gone wrong, because it's just the experience of living.
Yes.
So, yes, I have learnt from the past a great deal.
And thinking to the future, what advice would you give to youngsters today as to how they might live an enjoyable, happy, successful life?
I would say the most important thing I've ever learned is to examine your own self, because there, for the grace of God, go I. You know, when I see others then that have fallen by the wayside or whatever. And as long as I don't claim anything, because I can't claim anything, I'm due for death soon. And that I accept. It's only it's as important as being born.
Yes.
So if we can't just come to terms with things like that, so enjoy the trip and enjoy every moment. You see now, if you ask me now, I'd say, well, I'm looking out over a beautiful blue sky, the sun shining and the lights falling on everything and giving it shape, form and beauty. It's there for me now. It's not going to be some other time. No. It's now that I live.
Yes.
I don't live after you've gone.
No.
I'll live while I'm with you, and then I'll live wherever I am, and not wish I was back somewhere else.
Quite.
It's that.
Yes.
That's the worst thing of all, is the ego that develops, and the ego is who you think you are.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know, the thinking I am so and so. I could get very upset if I thought I'm so and so, and somebody said, "Oh, you're not," you know. But I had to be very careful of that at one time. People would say, "Well, what are you?" I said, "I'm a human being. A human being. What are you?" You have to be careful saying that. Stand back, because
Yes.
being human is one of the greatest things that anybody could be. And being human means you've got to learn what is human and what is inhuman.
Yes.
So you try and overcome those feelings of greed and unhappiness by looking in at the moment now. This is my life now. It's not tomorrow. It's not in another hour. It's here now. So that's the only advice I can. But it's not easy to do that. It's easy to say it, but it's not easy to do it.
I think that's a very good note on which to finish, Ken. Thank you very much indeed for allowing WarGen into your home.
Well, I don't know it's been of much use to anybody, but there you are.
You'll be surprised.
Okay.
Thank you very much
All right.
indeed.
Thank you. Very enjoyable, really.